Why you keep forcing answers before they're ready. There is a moment when something inside you is still forming. A feeling, a thought, a decision, a sense of what something means. It is not ready yet. But instead of letting it remain open, the mind starts pressing. It wants an answer now, a direction now, a conclusion now. Not because clarity has arrived, because uncertainty has started feeling unbearable. This is the pattern. You do not wait for the answer to become clear. You push for an answer so you can stop feeling the pressure of not having one. And because that pressure is real, the answer you force can feel convincing, decisive, clean, final. But underneath it, something is still unfinished. That is why forced answers rarely bring peace for long. They end the tension briefly, but they do not end the process that was still trying to unfold on its own. This is where the problem begins, not in not knowing, in refusing to let what is still unclear remain unclear for one moment longer.
What makes this pattern so hard to detect is that forcing an answer does not feel false. It feels relieving. The moment a conclusion appears, something in the system can finally stop bracing. The question narrows, the pressure drops, the inner noise becomes easier to hold. And because that shift feels immediate, the mind assumes this must be right. This finally makes sense. This is what I needed. But often, what you needed was not the answer itself. It was the reduction of tension. That is the confusion. Relief gets mistaken for truth. A fast conclusion feels wiser than an open process. A sharp answer feels stronger than a slow unfolding. So the mind starts preferring what closes quickly over what matures honestly. This is why forced answers can feel so convincing in the moment and so unstable afterward. They end the pressure, but they do not always match what was actually forming. Something in you had not finished speaking, had not finished becoming clear, had not finished showing what it really was. And instead of listening longer, the mind closed over it with the first shape that felt bearable enough to hold.
This is why forcing answers can feel like strength. You stop wavering. You stop waiting. You stop standing inside the discomfort of something unresolved. Now there is a position, a meaning, a decision. And positions feel powerful. But power is not the same thing as clarity. Very often, what feels strong is only what ended the inner pressure fastest. That is the danger. The mind starts trusting the speed of closure more than the truth of the process. It says, at least now I know. At least now I can move. At least now this has a shape. But a shape is not always the right one. Sometimes it is only the first form that made uncertainty easier to carry. This is why certain answers feel so solid at first and so fragile later. Because they were built to stop tension, not to reflect reality. The process underneath was still alive, still changing, still revealing itself. But the mind did not want revelation. It wanted an ending. And when the ending came, it called it truth.
What makes this pattern even more persuasive is that waiting starts to feel weak. If you do not decide, the mind says you are hesitating. If you do not conclude, it says you are avoiding. If you do not name it quickly, it says you are losing control. This is how pressure borrows the language of maturity. The answer that comes fast starts to feel more adult, more grounded, more responsible. But often, it is only more immediate. The mind does not always force answers because it understands. Sometimes it forces them because it cannot tolerate remaining unfinished. That is the deeper pattern. You are not only looking for truth, you are trying to end the strain of still being inside something unformed.
And once that strain gets strong enough, almost any answer can begin to feel better than openness. That is why forcing can become habitual, not because it works deeply, because it works quickly. It gives shape before shape was ready. It gives language before language was honest. It gives certainty before certainty had earned the right to exist.
This is why forced answers often create a strange second wave. At first, there is relief. You finally have a position, a sentence, a direction, something to hold. But then, something underneath does not fully settle. A small friction remains, a doubt, a return, a sense that the answer closed too quickly over something that was still moving. This is the cost. The mind got its ending, but the deeper process did not get time. It did not get to unfold at its own pace. It did not get to remain open long enough to show its real shape. So now, instead of one clear process, you have two layers. The forced answer above, the unfinished movement below. That is why people so often revisit what they already decided. Not because they are weak, because something in them never fully agreed. The answer was accepted before it was ripened, and what ripens slowly rarely responds well to pressure. This is what the mind keeps forgetting. Not every unclear thing needs to be solved quickly. Some things need more contact, more time, more tolerance for not yet knowing. But the forcing mind does not trust that kind of honesty. It trusts what closes, even when closing comes too soon.
This is why forcing answers can become a pattern of life, not only a passing mistake. You do it with decisions, with feelings, with relationships, with self-judgment. Something is still forming, and instead of staying with it, you push it into a conclusion. Now it has a name, a meaning, a position. And because it has a position, the mind feels safer. But safety created this way has a cost. You stop listening before the process has finished speaking. You stop observing before the thing has shown its full shape. You stop allowing before allowing could reveal something different. That is why forced answers often feel clean, but leave residue. A slight unease, a return of doubt, a subtle sense that something was decided too soon. This residue matters, because it is often the unfinished part trying to remain alive under the answer that covered it. The mind does not like this. It wants the answer to stay closed. So when the unfinished part returns, it treats the return as a problem. More doubt, more checking, more pressure to make the answer final. This is how one forced answer can lead to many more. Not because reality is so unclear, because the system keeps trying to stabilize too quickly what needed more space to become true.
Once this becomes visible, something begins to change. Not because every answer suddenly becomes easy to wait for, but because pressure is no longer confused with readiness. You begin to notice that the need to conclude is not always a sign that truth has arrived. Sometimes it is only the mind trying to escape the strain of what is still unfinished. That distinction matters, because once it is felt, you stop respecting every fast answer as if it were clarity. You start allowing more space, not endless hesitation, just enough space for what is forming to remain forming a little longer. Enough space for a feeling not to be named too early, for a decision not to be closed too quickly, for a meaning not to be forced before it has actually ripened. This is where the pattern weakens. Not when all uncertainty ends, when the mind stops treating uncertainty as something shameful, dangerous, or weak. And once that changes, something important returns. A quieter honesty. The kind that does not rush to sound certain. The kind that can stay with what is still becoming, without turning it into an answer just to feel better now.
That is where real clarity begins to separate itself from forced closure. This is inner cognition,